"One thing about these short summer nights," an elderly wing commander said, "we can usually shortlist the target files and have them in the old man's hands the moment he makes the decision." Nora Ashton, the young WAF officer, smiled at him briefly and then went back to checking the target files. Each one had been started on orders from the Targets Selection Committee at Air Ministry. She identified each file by its code name. Whitebait was Berlin, and Trout was Cologne. The code names were the idea of the senior staff officer, who was a keen angler. Recently he had taken up collecting butterflies and moths, but the CNC said that code names like broad-bordered beehawk would be inconvenient. Inside each target file there were population figures, industrial descriptions, photos and intelligence about searchlights and guns. The files varied a great deal. Some files were as fat as phone directories and packed with reports from resistance workers and secret agents, while many contained little that didn't appear in a pre-war city guide. Others were contradictory or out of date, and some were so thin that they scarcely existed at all. In each file there was a record of Bomber Command's previous attacks. "The Ruhr tonight," said the elderly wing commander. "I'll bet you my morning tea break, Essen or Cologne."
"Nay, what, on my wages?" said the WAF officer. "When you buy 3 or 4 sticky buns?" He shrugged. "You would have lost." Quickly she picked up a newspaper and turned to the astrology section. Under Aries it said, "Someone dear to you will make a journey. Financial affairs promising." She folded it and pushed it into the drawer. She said, "Someday I'll take you up on one of your bets. Anyway, look at the moon chart."
"After the casualties we've had on recent light nights, they might decide a full moon is too dangerous." "Too dangerous for some ops," said the wing commander. "But the Ruhr looks messy on radar screens. Moonlight gives a visual identification of the target. If the Met man predicts some cloud cover, they'll go, and the Ruhr's the only logical target." The girl looked up and nodded agreement. It was 09:05 hours, another hour and a half before morning tea break. She said, "What was the weather like when you came in, sir?" "Quite delightful, a perfect summer's day, not a cloud in the sky." "I do hope so," said the WAF officer. "Last night I had to get out of bed and close the window. The rain came down in torrents." She had planned to have her hair done that afternoon. Rain would ruin it. "My garden needed the rain. So did the Met people. They'd been forecasting it every day for a week." Neither of them raised their eyes to the Met map on the wall, where was written the finest weather prediction that money and daring could provide. Each hour it was amended according to reports from weather stations, aeroplanes, and ships at sea. There was certainly no indication of prevailing weather conditions from inside this underground operations room, known to its inmates as the Hole. The air was clean and at constant temperature, and the bright lights shone unchanging night and day. Here arrived the strategic requirements from Churchill's Cabinet War Room and from Air Ministry. From here went the orders that sent 4,000 or 5,000 airmen into a 3-dimensional night battle over Germany. Every square foot of wall space was crammed with information. At desks around it sat the top brass of Bomber Command, an awe-inspiring array of rank. An army officer sat near a hot line to the CNC Home Forces, and a naval captain clutched an armful of enemy shipping reports. 2 American officers had small change spread across a desktop, while a WAF officer explained for the 3rd time that 30 of these big coins made half a crown. "Then what makes a whole crown?" "Nothing makes a whole crown," said his colleague. "It's like saying, what makes a bit? 2 bits, maybe a quarter, but you can't have a bit." "I think I've got it," said the first American doubtfully. At this moment, the SASO, Senior Air Staff Officer, and the Group Captain IC Operations began to give the CNC a summary of the previous night's bombing of Germany. All eyes were on the 30-foot-wide blackboard upon which the previous night's objectives and orders were chalked in yellow and results added in red. Even as they spoke, a sergeant climbed the ladder and altered the failed-to-return tally from 26 to 25. "What's that make it?" asked the CNC. 4.5%. "Not bad. I was expecting worse." "What are we going to get tonight?" the Met man was asked. Here are the predicted positions of the fronts for midnight. Well-broken cloud all along the northwest coast, but clear from Hamburg northwards. Residual thundercloud with thunderstorms near the cold front. The Ruhr? The elderly wing commander heard the C&C's question to the Met man and nodded significantly. The Met man shuffled his notes. At present, thunderstorms are moving across the Rhine with this cold front, but they will clear by this afternoon. Midnight, thin layer of medium cloud somewhere between 1,000 and 20,000 feet, but it will probably have gone by 100 hours. There's a chance of a little stratocumulus at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Expected visibility moderate. What about northern France? Fine, moderate visibility. Well-broken layer cloud in northwest. And the weather over UK for the aircraft's return? Fine, a little stratocumulus at 2,000 or 3,000 feet. Excellent visibility. The C&C walked slowly across the highly polished floor to look at the quarter-inch map of northern Europe that almost covered one wall. Each of the target towns was marked by a color-coded reference on a flat pin. He looked back towards the moon chart, then moved nearer to peer at the Ruhr. The short routes were marked with colored tapes, and his eyes scanned them, calculating the flying times and fuel loads that each target would demand. As the C&C followed the routes, a knot of staff officers moved with him, murmuring discreetly like Harley Street specialists about to collaborate on an expensive job of surgery. Always their glances went back to the Met wall. As the moment of decision arrived, the officers ceased to talk. The only sounds were the air conditioning and the clock. Suddenly the voices began again. The decision had been taken. "Target files! Harry!" a young group captain called to the elderly wing commander, for, although it was a high rank on the squadrons, in this place a wingco was a dog's body. Nora Ashton pushed it towards him. Once again they had guessed the target to within a few files. "Krefelder's primary, Bremen's weather alternative," said the C&C. "H hour will be 0130 hours. No gardening tonight." In the center of the room were large drafting tables. On one was a map showing enemy radar and night fighter units. Another displayed overlapping photographs mounted together to make a mosaic of the whole Ruhr. The C&C walked across to one and tipped it flat. The Krefeld target file was open and large-scale maps. Target maps. Plans, diagrams and vertical photos were arranged around it. "What's our availability? We've much better deliveries from the factories this month. We are showing 783 heavy bombers, 148 mediums. The strength of the training units is unchanged." "Well, I'll use 650 heavies and 100 mediums. This target will give them all a chance." "Very good, sir." The staff officer put a form headed C&C's daily allotment of targets on the table and arranged the most recent reconnaissance photos of the target. Krefeld then, with 750 aircraft. "I'm going to increase the proportion of high explosive to incendiary bombs slightly. I know that the HE raises dust at the beginning, but we need the blast damage in order to expose the interiors and have something to set alight. Let's have 25 minutes pause before the second wave goes in. That increases the risk from night fighters, but gives us a chance of killing his firemen and policemen and air raid people. I'll give that second wave mostly he. 1/3 of the aircraft will carry one bomb fused for long delay to keep them worried." While he was talking, the C&C filled in the daily allotment of targets form. "Put some mosquitoes over Berlin to make the sirens go and some leaflets on to Ostend. I want the Berlin route and the Ostend route near enough to our mainstream route to confuse them." The C&C passed the written order to the controller. He got up slowly and left the operations room. As he stepped out into the daylight, the sentry gave a smart salute. Bomber Command HQ was hidden in thickly wooded countryside, but the sky seen through the beech trees was clear and blue. The center of the depression had moved across northern England and out into Sea Area Dogger. It was a young, vigorous depression and pulled the cold front eastwards after it. Leaving England to enjoy a period of anticyclonic weather, there would be no rain. Even before the C&C was through the door, the say-so was on the phone to the first of the group commanders. "It's Krefeld tonight, old boy. Weather alternative Bremen. Our Met chaps seem sure the weather will clear, but we'll have the usual Met conference call. I want to leave it as late as possible today. Naturally, you'll plan for sky marking just in case." He glanced at the clock, marked double British summertime. It showed 09:55 hours. Alongside it, another clock set to Central European time showed that German clocks were set to the same time. "Aren't you glad we no longer live in Krefeld?" Anna Louisa asked. "You said there would be lions and tigers and wild animals," the little boy said accusingly. "There are lions and tigers, and yesterday I saw an elephant in the woods near Frau Richter's farm." "You're always saying that," the little boy said with a chuckle. "You just make those stories up. If you've finished your egg, you ought to get along to school. It's nearly 9 o'clock.
She took a handkerchief and wiped a trace of egg from his lips. Hansel hurried to get his schoolbooks. "Take your raincoat." "Hansel," she called, "I'm sure it will rain." Anna Louisa made sure his coat was buttoned and his collar straight. She checked the schoolbooks in his case and ran a comb through his short hair. When all was approved, she gave him a little salute. "All is in order. Herr Leutnant, say goodbye to Pappy." The little boy saluted gravely.
Anna Louisa reached for a second egg and placed it carefully in the simmering water. "Breakfast! Herr Bach!" she called. Neither the little boy nor his father, for whom she was preparing breakfast, belonged to Anna Louisa. She was a member of the RADWJ, a uniformed labour force of mothers' helps and social workers. A little over a year ago, she had gone to work for Frau Bach in Krefeld, 12 kilometres away in the Ruhr district. She had liked the job, adored the child, and Frau Bach had been a not unreasonable employer. Within a month of her starting work, Frau Bach had been killed in an air raid. Herr Bach and his elder son, Peter, an infantry private just 18 years old, had been flown back from the Russian front. The authorities had a simple solution. They wanted to evacuate little Hansel to a Hitler youth camp in the Protectorate of Czechoslovakia, but Herr Bach preferred that Anna Louisa should stay with the boy. He wanted some place that he could think of as home, although the cost of renting an apartment just for one 10-year-old made terrible demands upon his Oberleutnant's pay. Herr Bach's cousin suggested that they should move into this apartment in the town of Altgarten, not far from the Netherlands border. It had been the home of Gerd's father, but had been unoccupied since the old man's death almost 2 years before. Gerd had loaded Bach's salvaged furniture into his grocer's van and brought it here from Krefeld. That was a year ago. And since then, August Bach, Luftwaffe Oberleutnant and commanding officer of radar station Ermine, had learned to call it home. Now that he was stationed on the Netherlands coast, he was able to see his small son every 2 or 3 weeks. Last Christmas, his grown-up son Peter had also come home on leave. It was a happy time. "Breakfast is ready, Herr Bach," called Anna Louisa. "Did you hear the thunder?" asked Bach. "I made Hansel take his raincoat. It's just a summer storm," said Bach. "If it does rain, it will soon be over." "I hope so," said Anna Louisa. "You've such a long journey." When August Bach sat down to breakfast, she noticed that he was wearing his best uniform. She approved of his uniform, for although he was 46 years old, he was tall and slim, and his greying hair served only to emphasize the tan on his face. At his throat, the Pour le Mérite medal glittered. "The milk is sour." "The thunder must have caused it," said the girl. "It doesn't matter. This is the last of the real coffee you brought. Do you know, Herr Bach, I am so used to ersatz coffee that the real beans you bring from Holland keep me awake at night." "Where is an egg for you, Anna Louisa?" "There were only 2. Herr Bach, the hens are not laying, and they cost 6 Reichsmarks each." There is a terrible shortage this month. Have this one? The Luftwaffe live well in Holland. Only last week, Willi. My Stabsfeldwebel laid his hands on some cream. He passed the egg to her. You'll never believe me, Herr Bach. But I don't remember the taste of cream, babe. I believe you, said August Bach. I'll speak to him when I get back and see if he can't find some for me next month when I come. Did you notice, Herr Bach, little Hansel has picked up this terrible local accent? Like my cousin Gerd's, said August, smiling. August Bach watched the girl eating his boiled egg. She looked up and smiled. What did an accent matter? She was very beautiful, especially when she smiled. Without her he would have no home, and, unless you counted the occasional printed postcard from a Hitler youth camp in the Protectorate, no young son either. Nowadays the children were being evacuated farther and farther away. Bombed-out children from Cologne had gone to Bulgaria and Hungary. Herr Bach, said Anna Louisa, is it true that many RAF girls are going to work on flak sites? There is a rumour that they will even be manning the guns. Bach had always feared that someday Anna Louisa would decide that looking after little Hansel was not a great enough contribution to the war effort. Worse still, he feared that the RAD Bureau would decide that for her. But here in the country, the pace of things was slower. There was no RAD Bureau in Altgarten, no SA, and even the party HQ was closed on market day. Are you unhappy, Anna Louisa? He asked. Are you thinking of leaving us? I would never leave you, Herr Bach, she said.
Never. I will look after Hansel all the rest of my life. Now. Anna Louisa, you mustn't make promises like that. I will, Herr Bach, I will. I love Hansel as though he was my own child. Then why do you ask me about the RAD girls going to the gun sites? Asked August. She got to her feet and began to clear the breakfast table. Have you finished your coffee? Yes. I'm sorry, but there is now only the ersatz. Answer me. Anna Louisa, Herr Bach, she said.
She was standing at the sink now with her face turned away from him. He waited for her to continue. She was attractive in her neat white blouse and brown skirt, with her blonde hair drawn back into a severe knot. Why had he not noticed before her long, slim legs and strong young arms? Undressed. She would look. He killed the thought immediately. She was only a child. Perhaps a year or so older than his infantryman's son. Her service in the RAD was a patriotic duty. It was his job to look after her, not lust after her. Are there, she paused, any RAD girls working at your radar site? August Bach didn't laugh, although the thought of girls in that desolate spot on the Dutch coast made him realize how little she understood the rigors of his life there. There are no girls, Anna Louisa. I only wish there were. He joked. And he looked up at her, still smiling, to discover her face racked with tears. He took his handkerchief to dry her eyes.
Anna Louisa, whatever is the matter? Be careful of the washing up water on your fine uniform, she said, raising her face to him. And the next moment, he found that he was kissing her. She was sobbing as though she would never stop. It was difficult to understand what she was saying. But August Bach suddenly found that everything made sense to him. I love you, Herr Bach, she said.
He smoothed her blonde hair and made little clicking noises with his lips in the hope that it would stop her crying. I love you, she said again. Whatever shall we do? You can stop calling me Herr Bach for one thing, he said. What will people say? She said. Does it matter? This is a little country town, Herr August. Just August. August, people gossip here. There is no telling what stories will go round. He had his arms round her and felt her sobbing gently. He patted her shoulder awkwardly and paternally. It was a damnable situation. Almost the whole town knew August's cousin, Gerd Boll the grocer, and through him half the town knew August. Often strangers would talk to him in the street as though they were lifelong friends. "We must take things slowly," said August. Anna Louisa nodded. "Oh, for God's sake," he said. "Do you think they're not gossiping about us already?" "They are," said Anna Louisa. "But it does not matter. I love you." And he held her more tightly and less paternally. "And I love you, said August, and he realized that he did. All these months of spending his leaves in the same house with this young girl. No wonder neighbors talked. To her he must have seemed unnatural or inhuman. He looked at her. She was a simple girl, and for her perhaps he was a frightening figure. He asked himself to what extent he had been hurrying back here to see the child, and to what extent because it was his home, a home that Anna Louisa had created, a place where his favorite foods were placed before him and his favorite records near the gramophone. August realized that all these months he had been hurrying back to Anna Louisa. "I love you." "Anna Louisa," he said, "I want you to marry me." She raised her reddened eyes to him. Her hair had fallen forward. She was remarkably beautiful even in this disarray. Even more beautiful, perhaps. "There are my parents, Herr Bach. You will have to visit them, or at least write. I will do that today," he said. He stroked her head again and took her hand. It was a slim hand, reddened by hard work. Scrubbing floors and washing Hansel's clothes and August's shirts. "Damn, damn, damn," said August Bach under his breath, and then began to undress her, still declaiming loudly about how foolish they were. He unpinned the rayed swastika brooch from her blouse and set it aside carefully. "How old are you?" he asked suddenly. 22, said Anna Louisa. "Well, there you are," said August. "It's stupid, absolutely stupid," but he did not undress her more slowly. The nearby church clock struck 9, and a horse and cart clattered past the house. It made their intimacy more conspiratorial to hear the town going about its business just a few yards away.
"I love you, Herr Bach," said Anna Louisa. "August?" insisted August. "You'll write?" "Every day," swore August. "And to my father?" "This afternoon?" "I love you, Herr August," said Anna Louisa. "I love both of you. We shall make a perfect family. You just see, I will buy new fabric for the front room curtains. And Hansel needs new shoes." He pulled the pins from her hair, and it tumbled down over her face. He had never seen her with her hair loose.
It had always been rolled tight at the nape of her neck, in a style suitable for her uniformed appearance. She laughed and kissed him again. By now they were in the bedroom, and the big brass bed creaked loudly as she climbed onto it. August leaned across the bed to her, but she moved aside and giggled at outwitting him. For a moment, a terrible moment, August thought that she was just teasing him. It was the sort of thing that a young girl might do to an ardent lover of 46. But no sooner had the thought entered his mind than she undressed herself. Still standing on the bed, she threw her starched white uniform blouse across the room and stepped out of her brown skirt. Her underwear vanished as if by magic, and there she was, naked, spinning round before his startled gaze. She pulled back the bedclothes and slid under them. Only her tousled flaxen hair and bright blue eyes were visible as she pulled the eiderdown up to her nose. It was the yellow silk eiderdown that his wife had been so proud of. Bach remembered they had saved so long to buy it. He unbuttoned his uniform jacket and put it across the back of a chair. "Don't come to bed with your medal on, Herr August," "It hurts," she called. He pulled the black and white ribbon of the Pour le Mérite over his head. "Show me!" He threw the beribboned medal to her. He continued to undress while she looked at it. She put the ribbon over her head and admired herself in the mirror, stiffening her naked body like a soldier on parade. The blue and gold of the medal matched her eyes and hair. "It's the Pour le Mérite, isn't it?" she asked. "That's very clever of you. I asked someone about the cross you wore at your throat. What did you do?" "I shot down 11 English aeroplanes in the First War." "You must have been only a boy." "I was 17 when I shot down the first one." She opened her arms to him, and he climbed onto the bed with her. "You know," she told him in a whisper, "I have seen this room 1,000 times from every place. I have even crawled under the bed to sweep and clean, but I never thought I would see the room from this viewpoint." Her skin was soft and warm and contrasted with the cold, stiffly starched sheets under his touch. "In future you will see it from this viewpoint as often as you wish," he said with a smile. "I shall always wish it so," said Anna Louisa seriously. She touched his face with her fingertips, and he caught the harsh smell of kitchen soap as it mingled with her cologne. "It's a gloomy room," said August. The wallpaper was dark and the oak wardrobe huge and ancient. They were both reflected in its mirror. Their eyes met. A streak of lightning came through the lowered blind and lit them momentarily like a flashbulb. There was a growl of thunder. Anna Louisa blushed and looked away. Hung here and there were old family photographs, unwanted in the sitting room, but difficult to throw away. On the washstand, a basin and jug glinted in the rosy light coming through the pink blind. A potted plant silhouetted against it shivered in the draught from the window. Anna Louisa touched the Pour le Mérite medal. She grinned. "It looks better on me," she said. "It does," he agreed, and reached out for her. "And the red ribbon?" "For the East Front," he said. "The Eisbein Orden?"
The Cold Feet medal. That must have been terrible. It was... His voice was muffled as he kissed her ear. "Herr August," she whispered as they began to make love. "Shall I always sleep in this bed now?" "Yes," said August. "Close to." He noticed that her hair was almost white, and under its fringe her eyes were reddened by sobbing, and the tip of her nose was too. She smiled at him again. The light faded, and there was the chilly gust of air that precedes a storm.
Without hurry, August made love to her as the thunderclouds darkened the gloomy room. Afterwards she clutched him very tightly and made his arm wet with her silent tears. He reached for his cheroots and lit one. He wanted to tell her everything he had ever done and show her everything he had ever seen. There was so little time before he must go. "Will you be kind to me, Herr August?" He kissed the side of her nose. "Kindness in a man is a quality few women admire," he said.
"Especially very young, very beautiful women. I shall always admire you, Herr August. Tell me about the medal." We were all victims of these symbols and trinkets. Totems and taboos, thought August Bach. Why should the girl be attracted by the blue enamelled cross? What could it mean to her? The aeroplanes were different then. Biplanes, fragile little affairs of sticks and fabric. Why was he using those old clichés? They were tough little planes and agile too. Not like today's sophisticated metal machines, so full of fuel pipes, radio gear and delicate equipment that even a heavy bump on takeoff made something malfunction. They were painted with strange patterns of mauve and pink and grey. I can remember them. It wasn't true. He could no longer remember the difference between a Halberstadt and an albatross. It was the smell that he remembered. The fuel and the dope, shrill smells that caught the back of the throat.
He remembered, too, the sound of the Mercedes motor firing and the roar of it echoing against the side of the hangar. I remember the day I shot down my first Englishman. It was a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. Or was he telling it correctly? Surely that was the day he got the telegram about his mother dying. It was pouring with rain the day he shot down his first Englishman. "Were you afraid?" asked Anna Louisa. "I was afraid that someone would think I might be afraid," he said. It was a conventional answer. The true answer was that at 18 he didn't have enough intelligence to be afraid with, "Did you see the Englishman?" He tried to remember. It was a two-seater. I saw the pilot's white silk scarf floating out of the cockpit. I came out of the sun. Were you proud? I'd killed 2 men. Anna Louisa. It's a terrible thing. He wondered what sort of men they were or might have become. The British should never have sent men out in those BE-2s, not over the lines anyway. After he landed and claimed his first victory, his Staffel commander said, "A B-2, I suppose." This one had already been shot up, but he fought like the devil. On the 3rd pass, the gunner ran out of ammunition. He waved and pointed to his gun. A white-faced fellow with a moustache. No youngster. The pilot seemed unable to open the throttle. He looked over his shoulder to see how close the attack was coming. They stood no chance. He went out to the crash to salvage the roundel markings as a trophy, but there was blood all over the canvas upon which they were painted. Both British flyers were dead. The sentry told him that one of the medical orderlies had kept an Englishman's scarf. "He'll sell it for 5 marks, said the sentry. Bach had declined. "I want to walk with you, Herr August. Can we go shopping together?" "And we will lunch together at the Stube," he answered. "It will be wonderful, August." She stroked his head. "We will walk everywhere, Anna Louisa. Everyone shall see us arm in arm. I love you, August. I shall always love you." The room lit up bright pink. 1,000, said Anna Louisa. 2,000. When he puffed at his cheroot, he found it had gone out. He reached for his matches and relit it carefully. Then he held up the match, and Anna Louisa blew it out, but still counted on. When the thunder came, she pronounced the storm to be 4 kilometers away. There was still no sound of rain. "Did you know how to tell how far away a storm is?" she asked. "You can never be sure," said August. The huge layer of cold air that was approaching Altgarten moved eastwards across Europe at 20 miles per hour. As it moved, the cold front's sharp edge chiseled under the unstable, humid summer air and levered it skywards to form thunderclouds. There was thunder too, and lightning, and in places rain. 80 miles northwest of Altgarten, the rain fell upon the IJsselmeer, the great inland sea that opened the heart of Holland to the northern storms. At first, the rain was light and constant, dropping from the low nimbostratus cloud like black columns that propped up the sky. Then came the rain from the cumulonimbus, falling 10 miles right through the nimbostratus, and crashing in great sheets upon the rough waters of the IJsselmeer. The wind had veered to the north, and sudden gusts of it pushed the rain horizontal. It deluged the little lakes near Utrecht. Hundreds of ducks, herons, and hundreds of other water birds sheltered miserably along the water's edge and under wooden piers from which even the anglers had departed. At Kroonsdijk, the rain beat upon the farm-style buildings and the duck pond and hammered the flat, cobbled and asphalt causeways so that fine spray rebounded like tall white grass. In building number 31, the rain awoke Oberleutnant Baron Victor von Löwenherz when even the thunder had failed. He looked at the clock. It was 10 o'clock Central European summertime, and the barometer had fallen dramatically. He reset the barometer. for when the pressure started to rise and the wind steadied and backed, he would know that the cold front and its line squalls had nearly passed. Löwenherz took a close interest in the weather, for he was a pilot and Kroonsdijk was a Luftwaffe night fighter airfield. The military installations had been designed to look like Dutch farm buildings. The big roofs that sloped almost to the ground and the timber exteriors disguised concrete blockhouses. The shutters, painted with gay peasant designs, were made of 6mm steel. Instead of a rectangular fire hydrant tank, here was an oval pond, and upon it the Luftwaffe had installed ducks to complete the illusion. Grazing near the runways were herds of pantomime cows made from lath and plaster. The subject of jokes and derision, they were enough to deceive the air cameras. Outside the window, motor vehicles and beyond them twin-engined fighter aeroplanes were parked under the trees. Nothing had been left to chance. This site had been selected, surveyed and decided upon. The architect's plans had been completed and all was ready, 3 years before Holland was invaded. Now Kroonsdijk had become a key factor in the air defence of Germany. It lay upon the direct route from the bomber airfields in eastern England to the heart of industrial Germany, as a toll gate on a dark, busy road. It was not surprising that Oberleutnant Baron Victor von Löwenherz had many times been photographed for the Nazi magazines Der Adler and Signal, for he was the personification of National Socialist propaganda, although they often chose to omit his title. For the new Nazi state had created its own aristocracy. Tall, slim and elegant, his hair was blonde, and by this time of year the sun had turned it almost white. His face had the sharp-edged, bony look that sculptors invent, and his teeth were white and even. He jumped out of bed and did his physical exercises, 20 press-ups, 800 paces on the spot, knees high, stretching, knees bending, and arms flinging, watched with deadpan interest by the young bulldog that was lying in its usual spot under the writing table. Löwenherz's room was small and rather dark, for windows were kept as small as possible to reduce the danger from blast and shrapnel. In one corner was an iron bedstead with grey blankets, which he now carefully remade, folding each corner neatly and expertly, as he had done every morning since he joined the army as an officer cadet in 1937. For well over 300 years, the Löwenherz family had supplied soldiers to Prussia. A Heinrich Löwenherz had served under the mighty Wallenstein and shared his grim defeat by Gustavus Adolphus at Lutzen in 1632. But Heinrich's son had become a senior officer in the Kriegskommissariat of the Great Elector and had lived to see the Swedes driven from the battlefield of Fehrbellin some 43 years later. There was a painting of Heinrich on the staircase of the house in Gravieck, a pale-faced man with the Löwenherz nose and dark, broody eyes. His beard and moustache are trimmed in the Spanish style, and he is wearing the broad lace collar and red sash, even upon his breastplate and leather fighting clothes. As a child, Victor had been frightened to go past it down the stairs, especially after dark when there were only flickering candles to light the hall, and the howl of wolves came from the hills above the village. In the First World War, Baron Hans-Georg von Löwenherz, Victor's father, had lost an arm at Langemark, Ypres, serving with the Prussian Guards, and had gone on to become a staff operations officer. After the war, he had taken command of one of the secret instruction schools that the Reichswehr formed to replace the military academy forbidden by the peace treaty. It was natural that Victor should go into the army, and although he had never been truly happy as a cadet, he could look back upon it with pride and pleasure. Iti atuli. Tucked into the corner of a silver-framed portrait of his mother, there was a fading snapshot taken in Austria, at the time of the Anschluss. 5 smiling cavalry officers, their caps bearing the commemorative Brandenburg Dragoon Eagle of which they had been so proud. The following day, in Linz, they had caught a glimpse of the Führer himself. A month later, Löwenherz had been transferred from the army to the Luftwaffe and was a part of the intensive aircrew training program that followed the Munich Agreement. He looked again at those boys who had been his close comrades through the agonies of cadet school. They'd teased him mercilessly when they heard of his application to become a flyer, but they'd come to the railway station at 4:30 in the morning to bid him goodbye. He looked at their childish faces. The amateur photo was creased and faded. One was buried in Narvik. Another had been crippled in an amphitheatre near Sparta. The third was an oberst on Manstein's staff at Army Group Don. The fourth was commanding a Bewährungskompanie, a suicide unit for enemies of the regime, near Kharkov. The group in the small ivory frame was his class at the Neubiberg Edelby Flying School, with an old Booker biplane in the background. Only half of those recruits finally got their wings. 25 men, sepia-toned and defaced by youthful signatures, pupils and instructors at Schleißheim Fighter Pilot School. He was blinking in the strong sunlight. He'd just completed 200 flying hours when that photo was taken. It had seemed a lot at the time. Scowling in the front row was his present commanding officer who, like most of the instructors there, had just returned from fighting in the Spanish Civil War. To Löwenherz he had seemed a remote and glamorous figure with his 4 victories over loyalist Spanish planes. Now, he supposed, the new replacements on his staffel saw himself as a similarly forbidding figure, distant and cold and expert. Löwenherz hoped so. He stopped looking at the photos and pulled on his silk dressing gown before going to the end of the officers' billets for a shower. He scrubbed himself energetically under the cold water and dried himself thoroughly. He had a cat-like grace of movement that fitted his fastidiousness with food and his concern for clean personal linen. When he returned to his room, he spent 40 minutes ironing the shirts and underclothes that he had washed and left to dry the previous night. When Löwenherz finished, he put away the electric iron and dressed carefully. He inspected his gleaming high boots and fixed the Iron Cross and the German cross order to the pocket of his newly laundered tunic. He briefly checked his appearance in the mirror. The white tunic was immaculate, and he slanted the white-topped cap rakishly. The bulldog came out from under the table and prepared for the walk through the woodland to the officers' mess. "It's wet outside. Booby," he warned. But like his master, the dog enjoyed walking through the fragrant grass. The rain had ceased, and sunlight shone upon the wet grass. The dog sniffed each patch of it and ran across the road and cocked its leg at the slit trench bomb shelters. Löwenherz used to scold Booby for doing that, but since the shelters had never been used from the day they were dug, he had ceased to care if the dog fouled them. As Löwenherz stepped out from his quarters, 4 Dutch civilians arrived carrying mops and brooms. Behind them cycled Feldwebel Blessing, the civilian staff overseer. The Feldwebel dismounted from his bicycle when he saw Löwenherz and saluted him with precision. Blessing was a young, overweight Bavarian with heavy features and small, piercing eyes. "Good morning." "Feldwebel Blessing," said Löwenherz. "There's rust in the water supply again. The same trouble as last March. I suspect it will be investigated." "Herr Oberleutnant?" "Excellent." "Blessing. I am confident that it will." Although he was unpopular, Blessing's efficiency was a byword, and his civilians kept the billets clean and shining. A few generals like Blessing in the OKW, and perhaps we shouldn't be on the defensive in the East, nor preparing Italy for an Allied invasion, thought Löwenherz. Blessing cycled energetically away towards the main barracks with Booby barking at his rear wheel. Löwenherz walked towards the officers' mess, and soon the dog returned, racing after him. Splashing through the puddles. Along the perimeter fence sat hundreds of seabirds driven inland by the summer storm. Booby chased them along the fence, barking and jumping high into the air. Lazily, the wet white blobs stretched their wings and circuited briefly before settling back into place. As he neared the officers' mess, Löwenherz recognized one of his pilots walking towards him through the sun-spotted woodland. The boy would probably have avoided a meeting with his Staffelkapitän if he had been looking where he was going. Christian Himmel was a 22-year-old Unteroffizier. His basic pay was 100 marks per month, plus another 40 marks in Wehrsold, war pay, and 75 marks Fliegerzulage, flying pay. This, even allowing for income tax and contributions to Nazi funds and winter relief, still left him with more comforts than he had known in civil life and just double what his father earned as a gardener. He was a muscular boy with short, untidy hair that he inexpertly trimmed himself. His face was round and his serious mouth full-lipped. Angel face, he had been called at the camp where he had done his labor service, and the lack of wrinkles in his clear skin did make him look like one of those carved cherubs that crowd together around the altars and pulpits of the Baroque churches near his Bavarian hometown. Himmel was shy. Although no one at Kroonsdijk had less reason to be daunted by Oberleutnant von Löwenherz than he had. In July 1940, during the Kanalkampf, as the Luftwaffe named the early period of the Battle of Britain, the circumstances had been very different. Löwenherz was a young ensign newly posted to a Messerschmitt 109 squadron, where Himmel was a very experienced pilot, with a Polish Loos bomber and 2 Spitfires to his credit and a novel reputation. It was said that Himmel had shot down more enemy aircraft than he claimed, and on at least 3 occasions he had been more than generous in allowing kills to be credited to others. Löwenherz's first 2 kills, a Hurricane and a Defiant, had a considerable number of Himmel's bullets in them, as Löwenherz was the first to admit, but Löwenherz had been Himmel's wingman, and, as Himmel said, a good wingman should share credit for every victory. A wingman flew 200 yards on the beam of his leader and covered him from stern or quarter attack. The leader navigated, led the attack, and made the decisions. Himmel had done that well. Himmel was also a skilled mechanic. His concern for the aircraft on the Staffel amounted almost to hypochondria, an obsession that was his excuse for being shy. Silent and alone. When he spoke with his ground crewmen, he tried to confine the conversation solely to technical matters. Sometimes Löwenherz could almost believe that Himmel ticked and whined and roared, and made better contact with his machines than with his fellow men. "Good morning, Himmel." "Good morning, Herr Oberleutnant," said the boy. There was a gust of wind, and Himmel, clad in black mechanic's overalls, shivered. "Plug's still oiling up. Christian." They fitted new rings, but that was just a waste of labor. "Herr Oberleutnant, there's only a very slight improvement." The dog made playful rushes at the Unteroffizier's boots. Himmel pretended to punch Booby's head, and the dog growled and made fearsome open-fanged passes at his fast-moving hands. "Kugel won't be able to do it today. The Major has had trouble with his supercharger capsule. He's given strict instructions that his plane must be ready this evening. Then Kugel will be busy," said Himmel.
"Very, very busy," smiled Löwenherz, picturing the pot-bellied old mechanic facing the Gruppenkommandeur's wrath. Löwenherz said, "I'll tell him to do a run-up when you land tonight. If you're still getting a drop in revolutions, I'll tell him he must fit a new engine. How's that? Christian." "Thank you, Herr Oberleutnant. Are you going to breakfast?" "I'm not hungry. I will have coffee when it's sent out to the dispersal."
"Shall I take Booby with me?" Löwenherz passed Booby's collar and led to Himmel. Booby barked happily. Löwenherz watched the young NCO and the dog move out of sight through the trees where Himmel was running, and the dog chased him until Himmel's black overalls merged into the patches of shade. The temperature had dropped slightly in spite of the sunshine, and Löwenherz noticed that the gusts of wind were coming from the direction of the HQ buildings to the northwest. The cold front had moved well past Kroonsdijk now, and the great, cold air mass was steadying. When he reached the officers' mess, he looked at the barometer. It had risen. Everything pointed to a few days of fine summer weather. Löwenherz was a methodical man. He deposited his peaked cap on the cloakroom counter and picked up a copy of the Berliner Börsenzeitung that was set aside for him. He looked up the prices of his Daimler-Benz, Zeiss Ikon and Siemens shares. He believed in good solid companies. He'd bought a few shares of Sachs Engineering because it was owned by the father of his radar operator, and although they had done wonders until a year ago, they had now begun to stick a little. He thought he might sell. He looked at the back page for the annual reports, but there was nothing of interest. Neither was the war news of any great importance. The war was at a time of hiatus. He didn't want to fold the paper and stuff it into his pocket, for it would make bulges in his newly pressed uniform jacket. So he rolled it carefully and took it with him. There were no new notices on the board. Glancing at his reflection as he passed, he smoothed his hair and opened the door of the dining hall. The mess hall was a large sunlit room with long refectory tables and a high ceiling. At the far end there was a patriotic mural covering the entire wall. Firm-jawed soldiers and radiant girls in peasant costume and flaxen plaits marched with flags under a canopy of bomber formations. There were posters that reminded crews of the dangers of careless conversation in public places. Another depicted a gull in flight. Pilots, he too is your enemy. A photo of a bird-strike-damaged plane was also shown. A cartoon pilot said, "If you are lost, climb to safety height. Don't descend through cloud. It's dangerous." Over the serving hatch, there were listed the civilian rations side by side with the more generous Wehrmacht issue of the same items. Remember, it was headed. There were two officers of his staffel sitting over a pot of coffee. Löwenherz joined them. Some of the tables were set for the brunch-style meal that the night fighter crews had at midday after sleeping late. It was still only 10 a.m. and as yet these three flyers were the only ones up and about. "Can I join the Kaffeeklatsch?" said Löwenherz. "The whole point system should be revised," said Lieutenant Kocher, a young Berliner. He was a swarthy man with long black hair, full moustache, and a beard trimmed just close enough to fit under his oxygen mask. Löwenherz noted his grubby grey shirt and unpolished boots. Kocher was noted for his devastating sarcasm and polished flying skill, but he was invariably the untidiest officer on the unit. Löwenherz decided that he must speak to Kocher about this on a more suitable occasion. Kocher went on. "On the Eastern Front, any fool can shoot down a dozen a day. 100 victories, 200 victories. What's it matter? Any day now they'll have a fellow there with 300 victories. While we struggle and sweat to see who will be the first man to get 30, complained Beer, a sad little lieutenant from Regensburg who before the war had been a racing car driver. His face was lined with worry and his wavy hair surmounted a very tall forehead. He too was trying to grow a moustache, but after nearly 3 weeks its growth was less than luxuriant. He fingered it for a moment before laying aside his copy of the Völkische Beobachter and sipped at the bitter coffee. A mess waiter put a plate of chopped raw swede on the table along with a fresh pot of coffee. The Luftwaffe medical authorities said it would improve night vision. Few aircrew ate it. Fewer still believed in it. But Löwenherz bit into a piece now to set a good example. Then he reached for a tin of vitamin tablets and took 2. "Do you think the tablets improve night vision, Herr Oberleutnant?" asked Beer. "Night adaptation G?" corrected Löwenherz. "Yes," said Beer. "There's a whole world of difference," said Löwenherz. "And you think the vitamin A tablets improve night adaptation?" asked Beer. "It's on orders," said Löwenherz. 2 each morning before breakfast, and 2 immediately before flying. "They should revise the points system," said Kocher. "At present, a pilot has to destroy, say, 13 4-engined bombers at 3 points each, and a twin-motor escort at 2 points in order to get a night's cross. At night." My God, we should get a Knight's Cross just for finding one. And now with this wet weather, our radar aerials will be all to hell. Beer nodded agreement. It was all Cocker needed to expound further. Why? On the Eastern Front, you can knock down a couple of antique American Airacobras and a couple of Lay G3s every morning before breakfast and get yourself a sheet metal tie in a week or two. Isn't that right? Herr Oberleutnant? Are you two still talking about Knight's Crosses? Said Löwenherz. It was no surprise, though. That's what everyone in the Gruppe spent their spare time talking about. Perhaps the whole damn Luftwaffe did. Knocking down Ivans is not so easy, said Löwenherz. I've never seen a Lay G3, but its newest variant is the Lay 5FN. It's got fuel injection, a 1,650 HP motor, and the exhaust gases, carbon dioxide and nitrogen, are passed into the fuel tanks as a precaution against incendiary bullet hits. It's got 2 cannons with supplementary rockets. A Red Pilot defected with a new one last month. I flew it at Rechlin Testing Center. It's a good plane. How fast? Asked Cocker. I got nearly 400 mph out of it at 15,000 feet. That's fast, said Beer. But what can it do at higher altitudes? Asked Cocker. It doesn't matter what it can do higher, explained Löwenherz. It's a low-altitude air war in the east. If the Ivans are ground strafing, or bombing at low level, then we've got to come down low and fight them. I suppose so, agreed Cocker. What's more, said Löwenherz, our technical people say its air-cooled motor will be simpler to service in bad winter conditions than the liquid-cooled ones are. The report also said that the airframe will take more punishment. We could do with a few of those LA-5s to replace these crappy old wrecks that we have to nurse through the air, said Cocker. There's nothing wrong with the Richards, said Beer. Last year I was flying all 110s. That really is an obsolete design. Nothing wrong with the Richards, scoffed Cocker. Where did you read that? The Völkische Beobachter in 1937. He tapped off criticisms on the fingertips of his stubby pianist's hands. Designed as a dive bomber, where we're using it as a night fighter, 4 years out of date. Poor pilot visibility, while very high landing speed, So, land a dive bomber with poor visibility at night with a high landing speed and you've got a handful of aeroplane.
I like having a handful of aeroplane, said Löwenherz. Anyway, next year we'll have the Heinkel 219. He was inclined to agree with Cocker about the Ju-88R, especially in respect to the landing speed. But the last thing he was prepared to do was to destroy the confidence his air crews had in their equipment. With all respect, Herr Oberleutnant, said Cocker. Next year might be too late. By next year we shall all be on the East Front, said Beer.
He helped himself to bread and cherry jam. A wasp was buzzing round the table, and Beer shooed it away nervously. You're a miserable bastard, said Cocker. When shall I ever hear you say a cheerful word? Well, I don't say defeatist things like you do, said Beer. He smiled thinly as he said it, but there was more than a trace of accusation in his voice. What did I say? Cocker reached for Löwenherz's Börsenzeitung and swatted the wasp with a loud crack. The war in the East was like a travelling circus and a travelling zoo battling in a wilderness to decide which should put on a show. Are you sure you didn't just make that up? Asked Cocker. Oh, shut up, said Beer angrily. More coffee, Herr Oberleutnant. Thank you, Cocker, said Löwenherz. He watched the bearded man handling the coffee cups. Those were a musician's hands. Cocker had wanted to be a professional pianist until the war had interrupted his studies. By now, a career of the sort he'd once hoped for was impossible. He had only to touch the mess piano to know how much skill had slipped away from him. Cocker poured coffee for Löwenherz and grinned at him provocatively. Some people said the young Berliner was an agent provocateur in the pay of the Gestapo. Löwenherz suspected that to be a story Cocker himself had circulated to provide an excuse for constant criticism of the regime and its methods and equipment. Here's to our Knight's Crosses, toasted Löwenherz with coffee. I'll not drink to yours, said Cocker, smiling. "If the bloody thing isn't on its way by now. It must be because they've decided to stop awarding them." Löwenherz bowed gratefully at the compliment. He had gained more than enough victories for the coveted Knight's Cross to be at his neck. His seniority and experience deserved a promotion, but the Führer's birthday, a traditional date for promotions to be announced, had come and gone. The pilots drank their coffee in silence, and Löwenherz held his napkin carefully in his free hand, lest a drip of coffee fall upon his gleaming white summer jacket. Somehow Löwenherz always had the answer and the technical data to back it up. It was amazing how he found time to handle the office routine and paperwork that fell to him as Staffel leader, as well as reading and remembering all the intelligence reports, doing the same blind, flying minimum that he had ordered for his Staffel, consistently winning the clay pigeon stakes, as well as maintaining a string of girlfriends from Brussels to Wilhelmshaven. Finally, it was little Beer who spoke. The Knight's Cross is always conferred by Hermann Goering in person. A visit to Karinhol, Löwenherz nodded, and the cauliflower for the Knight's Cross means an audience with the Führer. With the knives and forks they give you a 2-bedroom apartment at Berchtesgaden, said Cocker mischievously. It's all right for you two to talk of oak leaves and swords, said Beer. You, Herr Oberleutnant, have 28 confirmed victories, and Cocker has 12. But as yet I have none and might never get one. Cheer up, said Cocker. We all have the Iron Cross on our pocket. That makes it even worse, said Beer. How do I explain that mine was awarded for doing 20 flights without ever catching sight of a Tommy? Perhaps you'll get a chance tonight if the weather clears, said Löwenherz. Beer pinched his face and refused to be cheered up. Each night the controller sends up his most successful crews first. They get the first crack at the Englishman while the rest of us spend all day practicing instrument flying and all night playing chess. It's necessary for the defense of the homeland that the best crews are put into battle as soon as the first radar contact is made, said Löwenherz. Beer thinks the war has been arranged solely for his sport, said Cocker. You must remember that these bombers are tearing the hearts out of our cities, said Löwenherz. Ask Cocker if he prefers the best crews to go up first when it's his town of Berlin that's being bombed. Or ask poor old Oberfeldwebel Krugelheim, my chief mechanic, whose wife was killed in Stuttgart last April. Cocker added, or Lieutenant Klimke, my radar man, whose wife and 3 children were killed in a bombing raid on Duisburg last Christmas, one day before he went on leave.
All I want to do, protested Beer, is help shoot the murdering bastards out of the sky. Don't be downhearted, Sewell, said Löwenherz. You will soon have your opportunity. He finished his coffee and wiped his mouth carefully with his napkin. He stood up, and after nodding a good day to them, he eyed Beer's black leather zipper jacket, breeches and high boots. You're not thinking of flying in those boots, Lieutenant Beer? No, sir, said Beer. Good. There is a regulation about it.
The Luftwaffe Medical Service has informed High Command that foot injuries are very difficult to attend to if the injured crewman is wearing close-fitting high boots. I read your memo, sir. Excellent. Then that's clear. Good morning, gentlemen. He looked at his newspaper with the remains of the wasp spattered across the headline in ugly brown stains. He didn't pick it up. They both nodded goodbye to him. Kaffeeklatsch, said Beer. Patronizing bastard. May I quote you, Todd? Said Cocker. It's all right for a Krautjunker like him, said Beer. Son of a baron, enormous estates in East Prussia well out of the reach of the RAF. That's why he's worried about those Russian aeroplanes, said Cocker. You know, the mechanics across on Staffel No. 3 have got a nice fiddle going when the long-range Auntie Juss fly in with spares. The crews bring tins of caviar from Odessa to swap for bottles of Dutch schnapps. They say that that tall Oberfeldwebel with the motorcycle is making a fortune out of it. The other day, the mechanics opened a tin of caviar out there on the dispersal apron. They were sitting around in the sun, eating it. When Löwenherz walks up, the Oberfeldwebel gives him a big salute and spreads a great heap of caviar on a biscuit and offers it to him. Beluga caviar, say. "Sir," he says. Löwenherz looks down his nose at it and says, "Never mind what kind of caviar it is, but Oberfeldwebel, have you washed your hands?" Cocker laughed heartily at his own story, but Beer didn't. "Prussian bastard," said Beer. "And that damned white jacket he wears as though this was a peacetime training school. Did you notice him looking at your dirty shirt? I bet there'll be another reminder about officer's appearance circulated next week." "Screw him," said Cocker. "He's always wiping his mouth and fingers," said Beer. "He makes me feel like I'm suffering from some sort of contagious disease."
You are," said Cocker. "It's called poverty. Well, you know what I mean. And I hate men who wear cologne. He's obsessed with cleanliness. He's always in that shower whenever I want to use it, which isn't often," said Cocker. "Well, that's probably because he's terrified of getting a dose of clap from all those girls he runs around with. One of these days, Cocker, you're going to get yourself arrested saying things like that. Yes. Well, I can always count on you to help."
"Fancy telling Löwenherz that stuff about the East Front. A man should be prepared to live with the statements he makes," said Beer. "You know, Beer, sometimes I think you would have made a bloody, wonderful pope." As Löwenherz reached the foyer of the mess, half a dozen aircrew officers were arriving for their noon meal. He nodded curtly to each of them and collected his peaked cap from the orderly in the cloakroom. In the foyer there were soft leather chairs and low tables with copies of Luftwelt, Signal and Der Adler scattered on it. Sitting nervously on the edge of his armchair was Blessing, the man in charge of civilian labor. Sitting next to him, leaning well back and reading the Deutsche Zeitung, there was an elderly man in civilian clothes. Blessing tapped the other man on the knee. He lowered his paper and looked up. Blessing nodded towards Löwenherz. The man was too old to be local civilian labor, and his clothes were a little too good and of German cut. "My God," thought Löwenherz, "it must be a relative of some recent aircrew casualty." The man reached for a soft hat and leather briefcase, got to his feet and approached Löwenherz with a sad smile. "Oberleutnant Victor von Löwenherz?" said the man. The suit he was wearing was of pre-war quality but had been darned carefully at the corner of the pocket. There were 3 pens in his waistcoat, and under it he was wearing a grey, home-knitted sweater. The man's eyes stared calmly at him through gold-rimmed spectacles. His eyes were moist, as old men's eyes become, but they were as active and alert as they had ever been. His face was heavily lined and had the mauve tints that afflict the skin of heavy drinkers. His stiff white collar was of an ancient style, and the knot of his tie was secured by a gold pin. A doctor or lawyer most people would have guessed him to be, and, rightly, Blessing saluted carefully while the man extended a hand to Löwenherz. It was while they were shaking hands that the man said "Heil Hitler" in a disinterested voice that he also used for commenting on the weather. He smiled bleakly and introduced himself. "Feldwebel Dr. Hans Starkhoff of AST Netherlands, Group YL." The man's eyes flickered short-sightedly behind his spectacles, and yet Löwenherz wondered whether this myopia, like his hesitations and eyebrows raised in surprise, was a ruse feigned for his own purposes. The man watched for Löwenherz's reactions to his low rank and the manner of its coupling to his doctorate and to the Nazi greeting with his soft civilian handshake. He watched, too, for the reaction to the word AST, the Abwehr, or Military Intelligence Office. The technique of surprise was one that Starkhoff had perfected many years ago as a criminal lawyer in Hamburg. There was always work for a criminal lawyer in Hamburg, and a surprise immediately upon meeting could often help a case to a quick conclusion. From Löwenherz came no reaction, but Starkov still had a card to play. Perhaps I should introduce... He half-turned towards Blessing. Feldwebel Blessing I already know, said Löwenherz coldly. Ah, yes, precisely. Which is why I should tell you that Blessing is employed by RSHA and has a SIPO rank of Untersturmführer. May I see your identity papers? Asked Löwenherz. Alas, we carry none except a Wehrpass, but you may phone my office if you are worried. I am not worried, boy, said Löwenherz. Excellent. He gestured towards the entrance. We'll talk as we walk, he suggested. You'll perhaps feel more comfortable in the open air. He put on his Trilby hat and stepped out into the sunshine. The three men walked down the long gravel drive, their shadows sharply drawn on the path by the warm sun. When he realized that Löwenherz had no intention of speaking first, the man said, There has been a theft of some documents, Herr Oberleutnant. He paused, but still nothing came from Löwenherz. Some secret documents, he added. We are in no doubt about the identity of the thief. I am sure, said Löwenherz, that you have not come here to boast to me of your success. Precisely, said the man in civilian clothes. We should value your frankness and aid. You will in any case be treated to the former, said Löwenherz. As to the latter, until you are more forthcoming, who knows what it might entail? Dear Comrade Löwenherz, said Starkov, you must be patient with an old man. Secret documents have been stolen, and they must be recovered. This is the medical center. Herr Doctor, interrupted Blessing. They were stolen from this building. Starkov explained to Löwenherz. We know the thief, but lack the... Corpus delicti, supplied Löwenherz. Precisely, said Starkov. He turned to his colleague. The corpus delicti. Blessing. That's what you must find. They stood on the road between the farm-like headquarters buildings. Everywhere was quiet, for the true working day of this night fighter station had not yet begun. A lorry rattled noisily through the main gate, loaded with oil drums. Outside the pay section, a line of men had formed and assumed the relaxed attitudes with which servicemen accept inevitable delay. From the medical center, two orderlies were bringing chairs and piling them together in the sunshine, while from inside came the sound of buckets and mops and tuneless singing. Starkov said, The thief first misappropriated the documents. It was later that he stole them. If that means that someone hid them behind a cupboard and went back for them later, why not say so more clearly? Eagerly Blessing said, The papers were secreted behind a cupboard, and the thief did return later. How did you know that? Deduction, said Löwenherz, and I'll tell you another deduction too. If you... Comrade Untersturmführer Blessing, the old man interrupted them. He raised a finger at Blessing. My witness, I believe. He smiled. Blessing nodded. The old man said, My dear Löwenherz, we should both be most interested in your deduction. Löwenherz said, You knew where the documents were, and yet did not retrieve them. Then you hoped to catch the thief taking them to some other place. Or other party, nodded Starkov. Excellent, Oberleutnant. You do not have the documents, therefore you did not catch the thief in... Löwenherz paused. You were about to say flagrante delicto, my good friend. Do say it. In a quick aside to Blessing, the old man added, red-handed. My dear Blessing. Blessing smiled. It was difficult to be sure whether the man was trying to make a fool of Löwenherz or of Blessing. When Löwenherz walked forward again, the others kept by his side. Löwenherz said, Since Blessing pointed out the medical center to you, I deduce that you have not seen it before. So it was. Löwenherz feigned difficulty with the SS rank and pronounced it in a precise and ponderous manner. Untersturmführer Blessing, who set a trap for the thief, but was outwitted. Sunt lacrimae rerum, said the man to Blessing. Tears are a part of life, as I said to Blessing at the time. Blessing scowled. Is it someone on my staffel? Said Löwenherz. There you go again, said Starkov. Straight to the heart of the problem. Yes, it's someone on your staffel.
Unteroffizier Himmel, supplied Blessing. Young Himmel, said Löwenherz. Why, that's impossible. I'd stake my life on Himmel. Is that your considered opinion, Herr Oberleutnant? Asked Blessing weightily. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Starkov said, Of course not. The Herr Oberleutnant was speaking merely as a comrade in arms. Such sentiments nobly become front-line soldiers. Would you stake your life on this thief, Himmel? Persisted Blessing.
My dear Blessing, said Starkov, the Oberleutnant often does exactly that. For isn't Himmel one of his most experienced pilots and thus essential to the safety of the whole staffel? Young Himmel is a fine pilot, hard-working and loyal, said Löwenherz. Blessing said, You went to breakfast at a few minutes to 10, Löwenherz said. I spoke with you. He said it quickly and defensively, and was angry at himself. And you gave Himmel your dog. Himmel took my dog to the dispersal.
Does Himmel often walk your dog? Asked Blessing. He smiled at Löwenherz and filled the simple question with complex innuendo. The dog chooses carefully the people with whom it will walk, said Löwenherz. Himmel was one of the chosen people, said Blessing. You seem better provided with malice than with evidence, said Löwenherz. Perhaps it's merely that Himmel is easier to apprehend than the real thief who seems to have eluded you so effortlessly when the crime was committed. Dear Comrade Löwenherz, said Starkov wearily, you are not the judge in this case, and even if you were, it is not Blessing who would be on trial. We have asked your assistance merely to recover the documents which we believe, with excellent reason, Himmel stole from the medical center. How can I help? Thank you, Herr Oberleutnant. That is what I was hoping that you would say. Earlier, added Blessing. Blessing, sighed the older man. There are times when I believe that making witnesses hostile is your sole creative endeavor. He turned again to Löwenherz. Last night, Unteroffizier Himmel had this document in his bedside locker. This morning, when Blessing arrived at his billet to arrest him, he was not there. Neither was the document. The only person he met this morning was you? Now, what do you suspect Himmel did? There are many possibilities. He might have learned it by heart and then destroyed it. He might have buried it so that he could return to retrieve it, or he might have handed it to an accomplice. You don't seriously think Himmel is a spy? Starkov shrugged. Löwenherz said, How did he gain access to this document? By accident, we think. He was due for a routine medical check on the 14th of the month. 18 NCOs attended the medical center that morning. Himmel was 10th. When he saw the medical officer to have his card signed, the document was on the desk. Sounds circumstantial, said Löwenherz. I don't think so, said Blessing. I rather agree with Löwenherz, said Starkov. The way the evidence is at present, it would be difficult to put a very good case. Impossible to put a case at all unless you mean against Blessing for incompetence. That's rather severe, Herr Oberleutnant, said Starkov. But I must say, Blessing, you will come out of this looking rather foolish, and your chiefs are probably expecting you to prove that a young SIPO officer can run circles around an antique Abwehrfeldwebel like me. Blessing said. I will take that chance. There's the medical officer too, said Starkov reflectively. He was undoubtedly negligent. Secret papers should go into the safe. He noted Löwenherz's face.
Never mind. As long as the culprit is caught and the papers recovered, there will perhaps be no need to bring any of Himmel's colleagues or superior officers into this. You hear me, Herr Oberleutnant? I do. Splendid. Young Blessing and I searched along the perimeter this morning. In the hedge, in the ditch, and then retraced our steps on the far side of the fence. Nothing there. I'm afraid I'm glad to see you're concerned about the fate of the doctor. A charming man, I thought. Something of an aristocrat, one might almost think. He smiled. If it wasn't for that unfortunate Austrian accent. Where are you taking me? Taking you? My goodness, we're not taking you anywhere. Oberleutnant, you have your duties for the Third Reich just as we do. But if you can spare us a moment. The commandeur was kind enough to take an interest in our problem. Löwenherz looked carefully into the man's wrinkled face. Starkov stared back coolly with an amused contempt for all the world. On the estates in Prussia, Löwenherz had seen the same easy-going manner among the senior farmhands and foresters. It was the quality one looked for when employing or promoting such men. Some policemen had it, and so did High Court judges. It came from dealing with many people and being able to predict their reactions well in advance. It came from the certainty that no one would ever disobey the suggestions that made orders unnecessary. They walked into the operations building. Blessing in the lead. The commandeur must have seen them through the window, for he stepped out to greet them. He was dressed in boots, breeches and grey uniform shirt. At his throat dangled the coveted Knight's Cross. "My good Untersturmführer Blessing," he said, "and Herr Dr. Starkov." "Heil Hitler," said Blessing.
Heil Hitler, said the commandeur. Heil Hitler, said Starkov, doffing his hat cheerfully to the commandeur. Major Peter Reidenbacher put on his jacket and buttoned it. He was 33 years old, elderly by fighter pilot standards. He commanded Löwenherz's Staffel of 10 aircraft, plus 2 other Staffeln that shared Krunsdijk. He was an impressive man in spite of his battle-scarred appearance. His shortness of stature and some false teeth were common among those who had grown up in the blockaded Germany of the First World War. His powerful arms were an inheritance from his furnace worker father in Essen, and his clear blue eyes and full-lipped mouth from his hard-working mutti. The thick muscular legs were developed in his teens by 68-kilometre weekend cycle rides to a DLV gliding club. Most weekends he had come no nearer to a flight than hauling the winch, positioning the club's sole glider or helping to build a second one. The small scar visible under his closely cropped blonde hair dated from a heavy landing at Wasserkuppe, on the bare, high plateau of the Rhön. That year he had won a minor prize in the National Gliding Championships. The permanently arched little finger on his left hand had come under a communist boot after holding a Nazi standard aloft in Essen in 1927. The sustained hatred that made him a killer was born in March 1923 when he saw a French officer of the occupying army strike his father and uncle for not removing their hats as a military funeral passed. The cold, confident gaze dated from 1934, when he was one of 20 chosen from 4,000 applicants to go to the Deutsche Verkehrsfliegerschule at Brunswick. This airline pilot school was a secret training center for the Nazi Air Force. When the Luftwaffe was officially born in 1935, Peter Reidenbacher was stunting a Booker Jungmann biplane above the heads of Hitler, Goering, the foreign press, and a deliriously happy German crowd. His forearm was scarred badly because there was no doctor in the Spanish village of San Antonio when a Republican Rata shot his He-51 down in flames there in November 1936. He landed by parachute in the village. The Russian pilot did a low pass over the rooftops and waved to Reidenbacher from the open cockpit, a big smile and an ancient leather flying helmet. And low enough to see that the pilot was a woman. No one would believe him. Until in January 1937, a high-ranking Russian woman was shot down near Madrid. It was at the Schleißheim fighter school near Munich that a pupil turned without power on takeoff, thus writing off an old He-50 biplane that would have floated unharmed to the ground, hands off. It was the worst crash of all.
The pupil died and Radenbacher spent 6 weeks in hospital, although he would never admit it, even to his wife. Still to this day in cold weather, the base of his spine ached like the very devil. His 4 victories in Spain, 14 on the East Front, and 32 French RAF and US aeroplanes downed had brought him a Knight's Cross with oak leaves and made him something of a celebrity. He had been shot down over the sea by an American P-47 the previous May, and had spent 4 miserable hours bobbing from wave-top to wave-top, perched on a one-man dinghy. He was too old to take that sort of punishment without suffering after effects. A medical board had detected his symptoms in spite of Radenbacher's denials. Now he had been advised that a staff job was to be his. Meanwhile, he flew every sortie possible. When he went to spend the rest of his life flying a desk, he'd asked that Löwenherz should take over as Gruppenkommandeur. He had been one of his pupils at the fighter school, and one of his best. Radenbacher was glad to have a young aristocrat like him in his Gruppe because, for Radenbacher, National Socialism meant the end of classes and social groupings. During all the wars of the last century, only 100 or so German NCOs had been made officers. In this war, under National Socialism, thousands and thousands of rankers had so far been commissioned. There were, at that moment, 12 Nazi generals who had come from the ranks. It made Radenbacher very proud to be a member of the Wehrmacht. It had become a simple matter of being a good Nazi. Radenbacher looked at the men across the room. The young Saipo officer was a good Nazi. There was no other explanation. Only a dedicated young officer would be happy to do his duty as a lowly Feldwebel engaged on menial tasks. The old Abwehrman was a more doubtful case. Why had he never been promoted to officer rank? That shrewd old swine, like too many men in today's Germany, guessed Radenbacher. Survived by evading conflict. Major Radenbacher walked round his desk, but he did not sit down behind it. Neither did he invite the others to sit. There were, in any case, only 2 chairs. The white-painted office was bare and austere, only a framed portrait of the Führer, one of Reichsmarschall Göring, and a small photo of Radenbacher and his wife framed by Nazi banners on their wedding day. The Major's tabletop was clear and efficient. A gleaming piston top from the wrecked Heinkel biplane stood near the blotter. It would have made a fine ashtray for anyone who dared to smoke here. Instead, it was a paperweight, but there were no papers awaiting attention. The trays were empty. Inkwells full and sharpened pencils placed to hand. The Major picked one up and tapped the tabletop reflectively. He raised his eyes to Löwenherz. "What do you make of Himmel? Victor?" Löwenherz came correctly to attention. His white-topped cap clutched tight under his arm. "He has 6 years' service, sir. Service record excellent." Löwenherz related Himmel's service record. It was easy to remember, for so much of it was the same as his own. "But is he loyal, Victor? Is he a true National Socialist?" "Yes, Herr Major." Blessing came to a noisy attention. "With respect, Herr Major, loyalty is something best left to my department. I'm sure my Oberleutnant had a reason for testifying to Unteroffizier Himmel's loyalty," said Radenbacher. He nodded to Löwenherz. Himmel was one of the pilots assigned to the Führer's courier flight in March 1941 for 3 months. All personnel were cleared for security by Kommando Stab RFSS. For a moment, there was a complete silence. "Why the devil didn't you say so, man?" said Starkhoff angrily. Radenbacher admired the way in which Löwenherz had caused the old man to lose his careful temper. "No one asked me." "Herr Doctor, that was over 2 years ago," said Blessing. "If his clearance had been changed recently, I would have been informed," said Radenbacher. "Even our Commando Stab security people are not infallible," said Blessing, taking folded papers from his pocket. "Let me read you a part of a letter written by Himmel." There was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Radenbacher, Lieutenant Cocker entered. He was the Grupper technical officer in addition to his other duties. In his hand, he was carrying neatly drawn training schedules for the coming 12-week period. "I'm sorry, sir," said Cocker. "I will come back." He ran a hand through his black, untidy hair. "Come in, Cocker," said Reidenbacher. Cocker was an excellent example of the new order. From the melting pot into which National Socialism had poured, the old Germany had come men like himself and Cocker. In the old days they would have had no chance to become professional officers. Cocker pretended that he would sooner be a musician. But this cut no ice with Reidenbacher, who recognized him as a man born to be a pilot as few men were. He still had much to learn. There was no shortcut to experience, but Cocker might be a great flyer of tomorrow's Reich. Even now, Staffelkapitäns accepted he was one of the best pilots on the Gruppe. He had top grades in navigation, instrument flying and engine, theory and practical. He reminded Reidenbacher of the oil-stained old pilots' home fresh from the First War, with their medals, tall stories, hard drinking and acid galgen humor. Many people thought that Reidenbacher was too soft on Cocker. But this was because he knew that Löwenherz kept a tight rein on him. He looked at them now. Young Löwenherz in his white jacket, standing primly with his cap under his arm like a fashion plate. And Cocker, relaxed and smiling, with his shirt bulging under his short Air Force jacket and breadcrumbs on his tie. "Do you know what brings these officers here today?" "Cocker," asked Reidenbacher. "No, Herr Major." "Is it something in connection with the ablutions?" "No," said Reidenbacher. "The man you have in the past, known as Feldwebel Blessing, overseer of the local foreign labor, is an officer of the Sicherheitspolizei." "Ach so," said the satanic Cocker with a smile. "Congratulations, Blessing." He said it as though Blessing too should be surprised at his new status. Blessing clicked his heels. "Unteroffizier Himmel has stolen some documents," said Major Reidenbacher. "At least it is alleged so. He spoke with the Herr Oberleutnant here shortly before breakfast. You were seated by the window. Cocker, perhaps you saw Himmel this morning. He spoke with Herr Oberleutnant Löwenherz. I have just said so. But did he meet anyone else?" "Didn't he meet Blessing?" "No, I was waiting to arrest him at his barracks," said Blessing. "But didn't I see you tiptoeing through the woods?" "Blessing? I would have sworn it was you." "Your ears, if you don't mind my saying so. And a huge fat arse, very reminiscent of yours, came past the mess window just about 10 o'clock. I turned to my friend Beer and said, 'Tell me if my eyes deceive me.' Beer. But doesn't that look very like the big protruding ears and great arse of our friend Feldwebel Blessing who cleans the ablutions? At the time, of course, I had no way of knowing that Blessing was an officer." When Cocker stopped speaking, Major Reidenbacher said nothing. He flicked open the training schedules that Cocker had drawn neatly in coloured inks. This inquiry was distasteful to him. They all waited for him to comment. The gossip on the Staffel said that Reidenbacher had not been truly well since his ditching last May. Some said that he would soon be posted to a less active unit. In which case, thought Cocker, that humorless, stuffed shirt Löwenherz would probably take over the Gruppe.
Ah, well, he was a fine pilot, bloody efficient and fair-minded, so it could be worse. He'd never replace Reidenbacher in Cocker's eyes, though. The Major was a tough, barnstorming veteran who would break every rule in the book for his men. What was more, unlike Löwenherz, Reidenbacher had a sense of humor. Reidenbacher still said nothing. The old Abwehrman said, "If you did speak to Himmel, you may as well tell me." Blessing was indignant.
"You are not taking this clown's words seriously?" Cocker said. "Don't you remember? Blessing? The dog tried to bite you? If you saw Himmel with the dog, say so," said the old man severely to Blessing. "Of course he saw them," said Cocker. "Look at his boots. Look for yourself." Even Major Radenbacher looked away from the schedules and stared down at Blessing's grass-wet boots. "That's where the Oberleutnant's dog peed on his boots. You know how that dog pees everywhere." And Blessing was mistaken for a tree by the careless beast. Blessing knew that he was being provoked by Cocker, but he kept his temper and even managed a ghost of a smile. It was important that Radenbacher should not think him vindictive or precipitate. Starkov took off his spectacles in a gesture which had once been a part of his courtroom technique. Did Himmel have a parcel? It was foolscap size with a brown cover.
It's difficult to remember admitted Cocker. As I said, there was so much activity. Thank you, Lieutenant Cocker, said Starkov. Blessing, said Radenbacher. What evidence do you have against Unteroffizier Himmel? Blessing was still holding Himmel's letter. He said, "This is a letter from Himmel to his father, dated May 27th, 1943. He skimmed through it, mumbling, "Weekend. Well and happy. Thanks for the homemade bread. Ah, here we are."
Having found the place, Blessing's voice changed to one of stern officialdom. "Do not be alarmed when the English terror bombers get through, because that too is part of the Führer's plan. Grandmama and Cousin Paul had to die, and our cities must be laid waste as part of a great strategic scheme that my poor brain cannot guess at. It's the very measure of the genius of our highest commanders that they can allow the Amis and Tommies to drop bombs on us while they lose the war. What fools the Russians must be to think that they are winning the war merely because they are advancing on all fronts. What simpletons the British were to fall into the trap of destroying the Afrika Korps and capturing the whole of North Africa, when all the time our beloved Führer had planned it thus. Trust the Führer. He is full of surprises." Blessing looked up triumphantly. "Well?" he said. The words had brought a terrible silence upon the group. "Well, what, Blessing," said Kolka. "Wasn't it a noble letter?" "The traitorous swine," said Blessing. "The sarcasm stands out a mile." "What sarcasm?" said Cocker. "Did you detect sarcasm?" he asked Starkov. "Styles of writing can be deceptive," fielded the old man. "Perhaps you'd better point out which passages seem preposterous and quite beyond your belief." "Blessing," said Cocker. Blessing looked again at the letter. No one spoke. Aircraft were doing circuits and bumps. One approached down the funnel, slid on to runway 25, and, at the very moment of landing, gunned the throttle and climbed away into the circuit again. The sudden noise of the motors being opened up to full power shook the window panes. 3 more did it before Major Radenbacher said, "I think you'd better tell me what other evidence you have against Himmel." Blessing came to attention again. "The stolen document was in his bedside locker last night and the previous night."
Moan. "How do you know that?" "My staff reported it." "I see," said Radenbacher. "How many of your civilian staff work for the Sicherheitspolizei?" "Respectfully." "Herr Major?" "I could not say. But they have keys to bedside lockers." "Yes." "Herr Major, my quarters are cleaned by your local civilians." Blessing. "Do they have a key for my bedside table?" Blessing did not answer. Radenbacher said, "What about this operational HQ?"
"Do your staff examine my files and desk here in this office?" "Not regularly, Herr Major. Only when you instruct them to do so, eh? Blessing?" "With respect. Herr Major, we must confine the conversation to the arrest of the spy, Himmel. I request permission to take him to the Wehrmacht prison in The Hague, where a case against him will be prepared." "Be prepared?" echoed Radenbacher indignantly. "This is Nazi Germany 1943, Blessing, not some damned little South American republic. We work by the rule of law, not by the odds and ends of guesswork that you assemble when you've slept too late on the morning you should have made your arrest. My soldiers are entitled to freedom and bread and the rule of law. If you want to deprive my combat station at front-line readiness of one of its most skilled pilots, You must provide the proper work from your side. With respect, Herr Major, fighting communist spies and traitors is also frontline work. It is your duty to let me take Himmel to prison where he belongs. I don't need you to remind me of my duty, Blessing, said Redenbacher. As for fighting communists, I was doing that in the streets of Essen when you were still wetting your bed. You are refusing to let the prisoner be taken away, said Blessing. No, interrupted Starkov. The Herr Major has made his position very clear, Blessing, and a very reasonable position it is too, if I may say so. He nodded at Major Redenbacher and smiled. He feels that you are going off at half-cock and wants to prevent you making a fool of yourself. He's advising you to procure more evidence. Prepare your case more thoroughly. And I agree with him. At this moment, I really couldn't support you. Blessing, I think you'd better release this fellow Himmel, on the commandeur's assurance that he's kept confined to the base. Starkov had judged his timing nicely. His previous silence enabled him to sound like an arbitrator, although he would have said, like a judge. It took Blessing a few seconds' silence to realize that he had been outmaneuvered by the wily old Abwehr man. "Heil Hitler!" Blessing called loudly, stamping into the salute. "Heil Hitler!" replied everyone in the room. But Cocker's voice was shriller and louder than the others. Blessing left before the old man, who took his time shaking the hand of each of the airmen. As he got to the door, he turned and smiled to them. "You young gentlemen have had your fun with Blessing, and it might well result in Himmel's dossier becoming my sole responsibility. If it does, gentlemen, then when I return, we must talk more seriously than we have today. We will start afresh, and you must be careful of what you tell me, for as we lawyers say, de tipi quam fallere estutius." He smiled again. "Herr Oberleutnant Löwenherz will translate." He closed the door. "It's safer to be deceived than to deceive, or translated Löwenherz. "What a character," said Cocker. "He's an Abwehr man," said Löwenherz. "There's no love lost between them and the CIPO," Redenbacher said. "Victor, do you think that he precipitated the arrest of young Himmel just to take over control of this case by those very means?" "Yes, sir, I do," said Löwenherz. "I realize now that my conversation with him on the way here was largely dedicated to making me antagonistic to Blessing." "The old fox," said Redenbacher. "If I thought he was deliberately sabotaging the work of the Sicherheitspolizei, I'd report him. I wouldn't help those bastards get their hands on my worst enemy," muttered Cocker.